There's one thing that caught my attention this week, Rich. It was Caleb Williams, USC quarterback. So his dad, Carl, did a sit-down interview with GQ magazine.
Sure.
And so his dad, Carl, is talking about, hey, if the team picking number 1 overall isn't to my son Caleb Williams' liking, he might go back to USC next year. He might not go to the NFL. And Carl told the magazine he's got 2 shots at the apple. So if there's not a good situation, the truth is he can come back to school. Here's my 2 cents real fast. I got to see it to believe it, because that's a lot of money to leave on the table to go back to USC when you might not improve at all. It might be the same team the next season staring at you in the face. And the injury risk, right? Like, you're risking millions and millions of dollars. Like, think about that. That's why that's predominantly why all these college players skip bowl games,
right?
If they're not in the playoff. There's one game. So you're coming back for an entire season? And chances are he's not going to suffer a catastrophic injury. But even if he suffers an injury and that has his stock go down a little bit, we're talking millions of dollars, even if it goes from 1st overall to 5th overall or something like that. So I'd have to see this to believe it. I think it makes way more sense. If there's a team that you don't want to go to, just pull an Eli. Pull a John Elway. Say, I'm not going there. and you've seen teams buckle. That makes way more sense than going back to USC to me. So I would have to see this to believe it, him actually returning to USC next year. I don't buy it at all.
The reason why you're starting to see these reports is because Caleb Williams wants to break the mold of the difficult quarterback coming out of college. He doesn't want to dirty his hands with the reputation that quarterbacks like Eli Manning or John Elway give themselves to start their career, because all of a sudden expectations get heightened when they force their way out of the team that drafted them into a new situation via trade. Because now the fan base is like, well, we had a trade to get him. And now the opposite fan base, like in the case of Eli Manning, you're going to have a situation where you're going to have an opponent team that's mad at you for the rest of your days. You're going to have Chargers fans who curse the name, right? It's just the way this has worked, though.
That's true, but think about this, though, Rich, is imagine if, let's take a team, for instance. Let's say it's the Raiders. Or a good example. I don't know that they're going to be bad enough to have the number 1 overall pick, but think about this. Let's say you get off to a horrible start. It's a tough beginning to the season, and then the tank is on. And they're losing games left and right. It's just this miserable season. But there's this glimmer of hope, and it's the name Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've got the pick. You're right there, and Caleb says, nah, not feeling it. I'm going back to USC. You talk about a fan base. I get it, what you're saying. It's not forcing a trade and all of that, a la Eli or John Elway, but you would have a fan base that would be highly ticked off if he did go back to USC and they were in range to draft him.
Very true. However, what he's trying to do is trying to tell certain teams, and a lot of this is going to be clandestine. A lot of this stuff is going to happen behind the scenes too, where they are informing teams that Caleb Williams just won't play for your franchise, so don't bother drafting him. He's getting ahead of that. He's putting up the antennas for general managers around football. Like, hey, you may want to check in with Pops, because he's going to have the scoop on where Caleb wants to play next season. Here's what I'll inform Caleb Williams of, though. Does anybody remember the shape of the Cincinnati Bengals back in 2019?
Dude, that's the thing. They hadn't won a playoff game for almost 3 decades. Joe Burrow goes there. All we talked about was how dysfunctional that situation was with Mike Brown there. And look at him now. Look at Jacksonville now.
Yep. And by the way, Joe Burrow just signed a contract with nearly $220 million guaranteed. So here's the advice I'll give to Caleb Williams. I'll look right down the eye of the camera. I'll say this to Caleb Williams. Caleb, $220 million guaranteed over the course of, say, the 4 years, because I'm going to include Joe Burrow's final year of football at the college level, right? Just like we're talking about potentially returning to college football. When you take the $220 million signing bonus and you divide it by 4, that is $55 million a year. Guaranteed. We're not even talking about the other millions built into this contract. We're just talking about the signing bonus. There is no way on God's green earth that you are making $55 million plus to play at USC next season. So go get that bag, son. If you think you're good enough to play at the next level, you can elevate a franchise. They will find a way to surround you with talent. Some franchises can't or won't or don't, but most of the time, if you're special, like your Andrew Luck special, like your Trevor Lawrence special, or your Joe Burrow special, they surround you by talent and they make it work for you. Because Cincinnati was in desperate, dire straits in 2019. Then Joe Burrow got onto the scene. And granted, he had the knee injury and he had the comeback. But since then, they've built an offensive line around him. He's got weapons everywhere you look around that offense. And the Cincinnati Bengals are a real contender in the AFC. Why? Because he's there. So I get it. I know it's uncomfy to imagine going and playing for the Arizona Cardinals right now, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now, or the Washington Commanders, or whatever their name is going to be coming up. But the reality is, if you got the goods, they can build a team around you at the next level.
Well, and that's the thing to me is, I don't want to go too far with this, but this is a red flag to me. It really is, because, look, you're already talking about this, and we're going into, what, Game 3 of the 23 college football season for USC?
Yep.
We're already talking about maybe going back and skipping the 2024 NFL draft? Like, that to me is just like, wow. I want to hear this. I would prefer hearing this. And listen, I understand everything that he and his father are saying. I get it. You want to be in as advantageous a position as possible. Your supporting cast matters a lot. I get all of that. It's completely fair. But to say that, for that to be not only the message, but the thought process, I want a quarterback that's thinking, I am that guy. And even if we don't have a who's who supporting cast, guess what? I'm going to elevate everybody around me. I want that type of confidence. I want that type of swagger. We've seen what swag can do. We saw it last week with Colorado and what Coach Prime is doing with that team. It is nothing but confidence. And instead we get the polar opposite with Caleb Williams, which is, well, you know, if the situation isn't to my liking, I mean, USC may just run it back and maybe it'll be better the next year. Like what? It's going to be completely different? Yeah. Like, what's the guarantee there? So I just don't like the thought process. I don't like the message. I understand it, but I think it's a red flag.
I get it, but at the same token, this is a little bit of don't hate the player, hate the game. Because the same way that red flags go up for Caleb Williams looking at who could potentially be at the top of next year's draft and putting out the early warning signs that if you try to tank for him and he doesn't want to come to your franchise, there's no way he's coming to the franchise. Think about it with the shoe on the other foot. How about what Arizona's doing? Like, I mean, they are quite obviously tanking for Caleb Williams. And so that's awful too. That's a red flag for me. In fact, it's a bigger red flag because we're talking about more jobs on the line. We're talking about players who will literally risk limb and life to play football. And I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it's a violent football, or football's a violent sport. And you're going to basically expose all 53 members of your active roster to abuse over 17 games so that you can lose, so that there's no chance for a playoff berth, so that you can go and get the future of your franchise. So, yeah, I get it. I mean, yeah, there are red flags, but there's red flags all over the place in this situation. It all stinks. You know what the problem with the game is? The problem is that there's a draft in the first place. If you think about how ridiculous a draft is, like if he was the top lawyer coming out of law school this year, you know, from Harvard or Yale or whatever law school right now is the top. Okay, if he was the top lawyer, he gets to choose what firm he goes to. Why on earth are we allowing these NFL owners, ones who are either desperately broke, or doing a terrible job running their franchises, why are we awarding them with a player of the caliber of Caleb Williams?
Totally disagree with you.
There should
Completely.
be an open bidding process.
No
the
way.
highest bidder gets the player.
No. Terrible idea. Awful idea.
Because
Your
guess
worst
what?
idea yet.
It would wash out all of the owners who don't belong in this fraternity
You know
of
what
ownership.
it would do? It would crush what makes the NFL so great. It would crush parity. It is a parity-driven league. That is why it is so popular. Instead, you would have the who's who and the who's not. You'd have college football. You'd have it completely top-heavy instead of parity. Going into this season, that's why the NFL is so fun. You're thinking, hey, my team's got a shot to either make a deep playoff run, make the playoffs, or be way better than we were last season.
However, we see in college football all the time upsets happen. I'll give you another one. If you
Not
don't
over the course of an entire season.
If you don't love that idea, then maybe you won't hate this one as much.
Okay.
How about changing the NFL draft system to look a little bit more like the NBA? Now, follow me here. If you're one of the teams in the postseason, right, the top 14 now that we have who go on and play in the postseason and vie for a championship, obviously you're shuffled to the bottom. But how about with the remaining 18 teams? How about the first team out of the postseason, like the last team out, power rankings, whatever, who didn't make it into the postseason? They get the most balls in the lottery. They get 18 balls, and then the second best team gets 17, and then the third best team gets, and so on and so forth until you get down to literally the worst team in football. This way, it's punitive to those teams who can't get their act together, and you're at least giving a shot to. It's almost like a loser's bracket mentality, like the best of the worst gets the first pick of the draft.
I appreciate the thought process, but I hate the idea. I got to be honest with you, because here's the thing. The reason the lottery exists in the NBA is because tanking happens all the time. Just time and time and time and time again. You can count on one hand the amount of times it's happened in the NFL. It hardly ever happens. And even the organizational tanks, like you're pointing out correctly with the Arizona Cardinals, those players all year will go out there and play their guts out. So there are organizational tanks, but you don't have what you have in the NBA. You don't have guys sitting out games. You don't have it. It's unnecessary to change the entire system just because Caleb Williams has this interview and his dad does with GQ magazine. It's not needed. It's totally unnecessary.
You sound like the guy who's like, I'm not going to take vitamins. I'll just take the pills when I have the heart attack, right? Like, I'm trying to treat symptoms from a preventative standpoint because I can see what's coming down the road. As you start expanding the NFL season, now we're up to 17. We all know that they'll be up to 18 games soon. As we're hearing more and more players speaking out from their bully pulpit in college football, like a Caleb Williams, that I'm going to choose what team I want to go to. The Eli Manning thing, we haven't been talking about this for a long time because it hasn't really happened in a long time. It's going to start happening more often as these college football players have more agency. And if you expand the regular season further and you have teams that are willing, like the Arizona Cardinals, very blatantly organizationally tanking for talent coming out of college football, you may see a day where they rest real star players or they appear on the injury report with a back strain like we've seen so many times with some of these NBA superstars to avoid playing when it's a game that's either A, inconsequential, or B, does not help them at the end of a football season so that they can get the player that they need out of the draft in the upcoming draft. So I'm looking at taking my vitamins now. Yeah, vitamins stink. Nobody want to take them unless they're the gummies. Those are delicious. Like, the gummy vitamin D or, the Flintstone vitamins. Those are delicious. They've always have been.
You are freak out artist Ohrnberger. That's what it is. The heavens are falling. The system is broken. I got to get out ahead. You're the guy who has a slight headache and not only ran to the emergency room, but you've got like a hyperbaric chamber on the way, and you've got all. What if this gets any worse over it? It's like it's a slight headache.
You know who
like,
you are, Brian? No, this is who you are, Brian.
And you're gonna be fine. Don't freak out here.
You are. Hey, can I borrow candles and batteries after the hurricane hits? You're Brian. No, whose power goes out after everybody warns you that the floodwaters are coming, and you're banging on the neighbor's door like, hey, do you have any sandbags because my house is flooded? No. I'm not coming over there with my buckets and bailing you out.
No. You had a little mosquito bite, and you're like, the locusts are coming. Run for cover. That's you right now.
I need a flashlight. I can't eat my Cheerios while I'm standing in floodwater because I didn't listen to the experts who said the hurricane's coming. I'm telling you right now, Brian, no, the hurricane's coming for the NFL, and they're going to be tanking just like the NBA.
Here. Caleb Williams isn't going back to USC. It's just talk. It's not action. We don't need to scrap the draft so the top lawyer can go to the top law firm. We don't need to redo like a souped-up NBA lottery version of the NFL draft. What are you talking about?
Well, it's going to be you.
Goodness.
It's going to be you sitting on top of your roof on the newscast while rescue boats are coming to save you while I've already evacuated. I'm in the safe evacuation zone. There you go.
I'm going to be like hitchhiking. Rich, I need a lift. You're going to be like, I tried to tell you.
I tried to tell you.
You're crazy.